In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural damaged cardboard material. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. So after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group with many custom settings. And if you purchase the procedural material, it'll come as this node group so you can customize the look of the material. Now I have the texture coordinate outside the node group, and that way the users can choose between using like the generated coordinates or the object coordinates. But in this case, I'm going to use the UV coordinates because the cardboard has a specific pattern. So this way you can UV unwrap the object, you can make the lines of the cardboard point in the direction that you want. So because this custom node group has so many different settings, I've organized them into panels. So the first panel is the cardboard panel. So for this we have a scale value, which will change the size of the entire material. Then we also have this noise scale, which is a little bit of surface noise over the entire material. Then we also have two different colors for the cardboard, so we have color 1 and color 2. Then you can also change the roughness value of the cardboard, but I'm keeping it pretty rough. And then we also have this noise bump strength, so if I just zoom in closely to the material, there's just a little bit of noise over the surface, so you can change the bump strength of that noise. Then the next value is the damaged value. So there is the edge color, so if I just make this brighter, you can kind of see there's a little bit of alternate color there on the edges of the damage. If you make it darker, it almost looks like it's been stained, or maybe it has a little bit of dirt or something around it. Then there is the edge amount, so if I just zoom in closely here to maybe one of these edges, you can see if I drag up the edge amount, that's going to turn up that lighter color. So the edge amount is changing how much color you can see of the edge color. Then there also is the damage amount, so if I turn this up and down, that'll control the damage. So if you don't want the cardboard to be damaged at all, I can just turn it all the way down to 0, or we can turn this up and have it very damaged and even have it most of it damaged. Then we also have the bump strength, which is the bump of those edges, and then we also have this edge bump strength. So it's a little bit hard to see right now because it's not super strong, but if I turn this up to maybe like an 8, now you can see it a lot stronger. So it makes the cardboard look really worn and old, so I can drag the strength value to just make the edges look more bumpy. Now as I was editing the video, I realized there were a couple more values that I wanted to add. So in the product, I've also added this scale value in the damage to change the size of just the damage texture. Then there's also two detail values, so you can change the detail of the edge there for the damage. So there's detail value 1 and then detail value 2. And then there's also a distortion value to change the distortion of the damage mask. Now the next value is the corrugation, so I'm going to open this up, and the corrugation is basically like those lines, so it's basically like that structural support, those little kind of lines there, which are inside cardboard. So if you peel cardboard back, there's going to be that corrugation on the inside. So there's the scale of it, so you can change the size of the corrugation. Then there's also the distortion, so if you want to make it more distorted, you can. Of course, you shouldn't turn it up too high, but you could just turn it up a little bit if you just want the cardboard to look a little bit warped, maybe the cardboard got wet or something. And then there's also two different colors for the corrugation. Then there's also this brightness value, so I think it looks a little bit nicer if the corrugation is just a little bit darker. So I have the brightness turned down a little bit, but if you turn it up to 1, it's going to be the same color. And then there's also a rotation value, so there's the X, Y, and Z rotation. Now if you're using the UV coordinates, the Z rotation is going to be the most useful, so I can rotate this around. I could, for example, change it to 90, so now it's going horizontal instead of vertical. Then there's also the bump strength of the corrugation, and then there's also the displacement strength. So if I zoom here to the side of the material, you can see there is just a little bit of displacement, and if I turn it up, you can see the corrugation here is actually going to pop out of the mesh, and the cardboard is popping out of the mesh. That is of course way too strong, so I just have it at a really small value, but you can use that displacement strength if you want to, or just turn it down if you don't want any displacement. Now the next value is the dirt value, so you can change the size of that dirt texture. So again, it is pretty subtle because I don't want it to be too strong, but you can see there's a tiny little bit of dirt, so you can change the size of the dirt. Then you can also change the visibility of the dirt. So if you want this to look like really old, worn, damaged cardboard, you could turn up that dirt visibility. Then there's also the color of the dirt, so you can see I can make it lighter or darker. So let's close this one, and the last value here, the last panel, is the crumples. And so this is going to be just a little bit of bump to add more crumples and wear to make the cardboard look a bit more old and damaged. So it's a little bit hard to see right now because it's not very strong, but I do want it to be pretty subtle. However, let's just turn the bump strength up to like a 5 so it's more strong. So you can kind of see there's like some little crumples here and there. So then you can also change the scale of the crumples, so I can make the crumples bigger and smaller. Now you can also change the thickness of the crumples. So if I turn this down, you can see the crumples are all over the place, or if I turn it up, they're just going to be in a few spots here and there. You can also change the distortion of the crumples. So if I like zoom into this one here, I can turn up the distortion and you can see It's a lot more distorted now, but I don't want to make it too large. And then finally, there is the bump strength, but I'll keep it to 1, so it's pretty subtle. So if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. You can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. So before we make the material, I'm going to show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I went to the add menu, I went to mesh, and I added an icosphere. Then on the icosphere settings, I turned the subdivisions to 6 so it is nice and smooth and round, and I'm going to shade the object smooth. But then to model this better to the real life scale in Blender, the default objects are actually pretty large. This is a bit larger than an average human in the real life scale in Blender. So I'm going to scale this down to like a 0.2 and then hit Control A and apply the scale. So now this is maybe the size of like a large cardboard box. I'm also going to go to the add menu and I'm going to add another cube, and I'll scale this cube down to a pretty close size, and I'll move it over, and I can maybe rotate it a little bit, maybe rotate it forward a little bit. Also, I'll double tap R to use the trackball rotation, and I wanted to add a cube so that we can see what it would look like on a cardboard box. Then I'll hit Control A and apply the scale. Now, because I'm going to be adding displacements to the material, I want the objects to be pretty subdivided, so this cube needs to be more subdivided. So what I'll do is go into edit mode, and I'll press F3 for the search, and I'm going to type in sub and click on subdivide. Then right behind me on the subdivide settings, I'll turn the number of cuts to 10, and then just close the subdivide settings. So I'll go back to object mode. Now I want to go to the modifiers, and we're going to click on add modifier, and we're going to add a bevel modifier just to bevel the edges. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm just going to turn the segments up to 2 and then drag the amount way down so it's a very small value. So there's just a tiny little bit of a bevel there, and then I'll shade the object smooth. Then I'm going to press Control 4, so hit Control 4 to add a subdivision surface with 4 levels, and I'll set the render and viewport levels to 4, so it's very subdivided now, so it has lots of detail, so when we add the displacements, it'll have lots of geometry to displace the mesh. So then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera right at the objects, and if you select the camera and go to the object data properties, I turned the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom the camera in a bit. So then for the lighting, I added 2 main lights. So I added this area light right down here shining from the front, and the color is white, the power is 100, and the shape is set to disk. Then I have another area light, so this is the same thing, so I just duplicated it and put it here on the back. So if I go into the camera view and go into the rendered mode, you can see there's just a little bit of a rim light on the back, so that'll give some nice lighting. Now also if I go to the world properties, I added in the Machine Shop 02 HDRI from polyhaven.com, so link is in the video description if you want to download it, and I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So once you download the HDRI, you can click on the yellow dot here next to color, and you can choose environment texture, and then just click on the open button and open up the downloaded HDRI, and this will give us some nice lighting and reflections. Let's also go here to the render properties, and I'm using the Cycles rendering engine because I'm going for realism, but you could also use Eevee if you want to. And then let's open up the film tab, and I'm going to turn on the transparent button so the background is transparent, so it's still going to light the scene, but you just can't see it in the background. And then here on the color management, I'm going to be using Filmic, and I'll set the look to very high contrast. So I'm in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here. I'm just going to make this smaller, and I'll go into the rendered viewport mode. I'm going to select the object, and we'll just add a new material, and I can just rename this to Damaged Cardboard. And then I'm going to click and drag and drop the material onto the other object so they have the same material. So then I'm going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video, so if you don't have that enabled, click on Edit, go to the preferences, and we'll go here to the add-ons tab, and we're going to go to the search, and we're going to search for Node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So the first thing that I want to do is create that corrugation texture, which is kind of those lines. So I'm going to go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a wave texture. So we'll drop it here, and I'll Control Shift select the wave texture to preview it. And then to use the feature of the Node Wrangler, we can select the wave, and we can hit Control T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate mapping. And because we have a specific pattern here, I'm going to use the UV coordinates, and that way the user can just UV unwrap the mesh, and they'll be able to customize where the actual pattern is. So now what I want to do is UV unwrap these objects. So let's just make this a bit smaller, and I'll zoom in here. So to UV unwrap this mesh, what I did is I went into edit mode, and I selected everything, and in the camera view I hit U, and I did the project from view bounds. So project from view is going to project it from our current view, so it's going to look good from our view, but then using the bounds option, that is going to make sure, if I go over here to the UV editing, that's going to make sure that it scales it to the size here of that UV grid. So I'll go back to object mode, and I'm going to select the cube, and if you go into edit mode, you can see the cube on default is already unwrapped, although it's probably going to be pretty small. So I just scaled up the UVs just to make it a bit bigger. So if I go back here to the shading workspace, you can kind of see that's the size which I'm going for. Now I'm going to drag the mapping and texture coordinate back here. And then if we select both of them, I want to keep everything really organized. So I'll hit F, and that's going to join it into a frame. And I'm going to type in mapping and hit enter. So now we have a nice frame with a label, so we can keep all the nodes nicely organized because the material is going to get pretty complex. Then what I'm also going to do is search for another mapping node. Let's click on the mapping and drop it here and put it next to the wave. So this way, this mapping can be used to change the size of the entire material, so it'll be plugged up to all the textures, but this mapping can just be used to, for example, rotate the wave texture around. So let's now change the wave texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 8, and then I'm going to turn the distortion to a 1.5. So let's now box select these two nodes, and I'm going to hit F, and I'm going to call this corrugation texture and hit enter to keep the nodes nicely organized. So now what I want to do is put the corrugation texture into the principled shader, and we're going to be putting it into the bump. So let's search for a bump node, click on the bump, and we're going to drop it here. What I want to do is actually unplug the color, and we want to take the factor, and we want to put the factor into the height value to convert it to bump data. And now the bump normal can go into the normal, and I can control shift select the principled shader to preview it. And just for now, let's just make like a simple base color here. So let's just make this kind of like an orangey color and make it a bit darker so it's kind of a brown. And I can also for now just turn the roughness up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to just turn the roughness value to a 0.8 because that's going to be the final roughness which I like. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to create two different shaders and mix them together. And this first shader here, that's going to be like the surface of the cardboard. And then we'll be creating another one, which is like the inside of the cardboard underneath the main surface. So I'm going to box select these two nodes and press F. And I'm just going to call this cardboard surface and hit enter. Now, if you zoom in closely and look closely at the waves here, you can see they're kind of lumpy and they're not really the shape of those cardboard corrugation texture. So what I want to do is change how the bump looks. So to do this, I'm going to search for RGB curves. So let's drop the RGB curves in between the wave and the bump and then stick it inside the cardboard surface. And maybe drag these back so they have a bit more space. And what I'm going to do is click right here to add a dot, and then I can drag this dot up. And you can see as I drag this dot up here, it's kind of changing the shape of that bump there. And you can especially see it here on the side, but if you look closely now, you can see before it was very just like lumpy and round, but if I turn this up here, now it's going to be sharp there on the creases. So where it creases in, it's going to be more sharp. But then what I actually want to do is click on the invert button, and that's going to invert it. And you can see now those little creases are going to pop out. So that looks a lot more like cardboard. But then I do want the bump to be more subtle because right now it's a bit too strong. So I'm going to take the distance value and I'm going to turn it to a 0.0004. So that way it's going to be a bit more subtle. So now what I'm going to do is zoom out here, and I'm going to kind of drag these up here, maybe take the cardboard surface and drag it up a bit. And then I'm going to box select all of these nodes, so all the nodes in the cardboard surface, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-D. So Control-Shift-D will duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up, and we're going to drop it down here. So we now have two of these shaders. And if I click on this frame and press F2 to rename it, I'm going to call this Cardboard Inside. And then let's Control-Shift select the cardboard inside to preview it. So right now it looks exactly the same, but I'm going to change the RGB curves to make the corrugation texture a lot more sharp. So to do this, I'm going to click on this tab here on the RGB curves, and I'm going to drag this way down to about halfway. Then I can drag this down, and then if I click on this little dot here, let's drag this down about halfway, and then drag this down as well. So now you can see it looks nice and round, and it's much more sharp. However, I also don't want to invert it, so we can turn off the invert, and now you can see that that little bit is going to be going back in instead, and then also there's those nice flat spots. And as far as the distance value goes, I'm going to leave this how it is. So now let's create the base noise texture to add some variation in the colors. So right above the corrugation texture, I'm going to search for a noise texture. We'll drop it here, and we'll take the mapping vector and put that into the vector of the noise. Let's Control-Shift select the noise to preview it, and I can also press F, and I can give this a label, and I can just maybe call this like base noise texture or whatever you want to call it. So let's change the settings of the texture. So I'm going to turn the scale up to 30, and then I'll turn the detail up to 10. And then I'll turn the roughness up to 0.6, so it's just a little bit more detailed with that roughness value. So now I want to put this base noise texture into the bump as well. So what we're going to do is drag both principled shaders back here, and I'm going to click on this bump and then shift click on this bump, and we'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and we're going to drop these right here, and we'll click on this bump and drop it after the first one, and then do the same thing for this bump, drop it after the first one. So now what I can do is take the base noise texture, and we're going to put the factor into the height value of this one, and then also the factor into the height value of this one. Let's first go up to the cardboard surface, and I'll Control Shift select the cardboard surface to preview it. And I want to turn off the invert, so we're going to turn off the invert on both of these. And then for the distance value of this bump, I want to turn this distance value to a 0.001 and hit enter, so that way it's going to be slightly more bumpy, so you can now see the cardboard just looks a little bit bumpy on the surface. And we'll do the same thing for the bottom bump, so this second bump here, I'll turn the distance to 0.001. So now what I want to do is add the base color, so I'm going to search for a mix color, we'll drop it here, and then you can click and drag and drop it into the frame and just put it right up here. And what we're going to do is take the noise texture factor and we're going to put that into the factor of the mix, and then the mixed result can go into the base color. So now we have color A and color B, and those can be the base colors for the cardboard. So for color A here, I'm just going to make this kind of like a kind of grayish brownish color, so make it a little bit towards the orange and then make it a bit darker. And color B is going to be a similar color, but it's going to be a bit darker. And if you do want to use the same hex codes that I'm using for color A, you can punch in 7E, 5C38. And then for color B, this is similar, but it's a little bit darker. And the hex code is 63482C. So then put the mix result into the base color. So now you can see we just have a little bit of variation in the colors. So some of it is a little bit darker and some of it is a little bit lighter. Now I want to add the same colors to the bottom one, so the cardboard inside. So I'm going to click on this mix and I'll press Control Shift D. So Control Shift D will duplicate it. I'll hit F to bring it out of the frame, and we'll stick it in this frame right down here. Let's drag this down and bring this up so we have more space. And then this mix result can go into the base color. And let's Control Shift select this one to preview it. Now I want to drag it back, and then what I want to do is search for a hue saturation value and drop it here after the mix. And so I can take this value and I can drag it up and down to make it a bit lighter and darker. Or of course you could just change color A and color B, but I thought it would be cool to add like a custom value. So I'm going to turn this value to a 0.8. So that way this cardboard, the cardboard inside, is going to be slightly darker than the other cardboard. So now let's create a little subtle dirt texture, and we'll be mixing this in. So we're going to go above the base noise texture, and I'm going to search for another noise texture. We'll drop it here, and I'll put the mapping into the vector. Let's preview the noise texture, and I'll change the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 50 so that it's very detailed, and I'm going to turn the detail up to 10 so it's even more detailed, and then I'll turn the roughness all the way up to 1. And if I zoom in here, you can see it's pretty detailed, but to make it even more detailed, I'm going to change the type here to the multi-fractal. So now you can see it's very detailed and also a lot sharper. But then what I want to do is make the dirt even more contrasty, and I also want to be able to control it in the node group. So I'm going to search for a map range. Let's add the map range and stick it right here. So the map range values can be used to make it lighter and darker. So on the from max, I'm going to turn this up to a 10, and that way it's quite a bit darker. Now also what I'm going to do is search for a brightness and contrast node and stick it between the noise and the map range. And this way we have this contrast value. So if I drag this up and down, this can also be used in the custom node group. So we can have basically more and less of the dirt. So let's box select these three nodes, and I'll hit F, and I can type in dirt texture. So now what I want to do is mix the dirt texture here into our cardboard surface and cardboard inside, and we're going to be mixing it into the color. So I'll go up here to the first one, the cardboard surface, and I'm going to drag the mix back here, and then I'm going to duplicate the mix and stick it right here. So we have a second mix. And then let's take the dirt texture, we'll take the map range result and put that into the factor. And then I can just Control Shift select the principled shader. Now this mix can go into color A, so then this mix here, that's going to be the dirt color. So you can see if I make it lighter and darker, you can see we have some light dirt, but that doesn't really make sense. It makes more sense to have a dark dirt. So I'm going to make it kind of this dark brown, and now you can just see there's little bits of dirt over the surface. And if you want to use the same hex code, you can punch in 4B3721. So you can see it just adds a little bit of imperfection, which makes it look more realistic. So we'll select this mix, and I'll press Control Shift D to duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up. I'll hit F to bring it out of the frame, and let's drag it right down here and stick it into the cardboard inside. Now there is a problem, and that is that we have this mix result going into color A, but I don't want that. We want to take the hue saturation value color, and we're going to put that into color A instead. So we'll drag these nodes back here, we'll put the mix right here, and then the mix result can go into the base color to replace that. So if I preview the principled shader, you can see here it is before without the dirt. It's a little bit hard to see because it is pretty subtle, but then if I put this into the base color, there's just a little bit of dirt now, and you can see it better if I make it a little bit darker. Now what I actually want to do is put this hue saturation value at the very end of the colors so it affects all the colors. So I'll duplicate the hue saturation value and stick it right here after this mix, and then if we click on this hue saturation value, I'll press Ctrl X just to delete it, but keep the nodes plugged up. And definitely save your project if you haven't saved it already. So now what I want to do is create a mask, and the mask is going to mix between the cardboard surface and the cardboard inside. So we're basically going to create a mask for where the damage is. So let's just drag these both up here and drag this down so we have a bit more space in between the two shaders. And I'm going to search for a noise texture to create the mask. So search for noise, drop this here, and we're going to use the same vector. So take the mapping vector and put that into the vector of the noise, and let's just Control Shift select the noise to preview it. I'm going to leave the scale at 5, but I'll turn the detail to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.45. So now I want to make this more contrasty, so I'm going to search for a ramp and add a color ramp, and we'll drop the color ramp right here. And I'm going to drag both of these tabs together so they're kind of underneath the B there, so drag them really close to each other. That's a value that I like, but of course you can drag this down or you can drag this up. So you can see where this mask is, that is where the damage is going to be. So I'm going to drag it pretty close, kind of to like that. Then what I want to do is search for a hue saturation value, and we're going to put this node in between the noise and the color ramp. And this way we have a value, so if I drag this up and down, this can be used in the custom node group to control the amount of damage. Now, if you take a look at the mask edge, you can kind of see how detailed it is. So if you change like the roughness value or the detail value, you can kind of change how detailed it is. I think that this is a pretty good detail value, but if you want it more detailed or less detailed, you can. I find that making it too detailed actually doesn't look realistic, because when the cardboard is ripped, it's not going to be ripped and be like super noisy. It's going to be a little bit more bumpy. So you can definitely play around with this, but I do like it to be a bit detailed. So now what I want to do is select these three textures and hit F. And I can call this damage mask and hit enter. So now what I want to do is select this principled shader and shift select the bottom principled shader. So with both of them selected, I'm going to hit Control 0, and that's going to add this mix shader. Let's bring it up here, and I'll Control Shift select the mix shader to preview it. And I want to flip these values, so I actually want to put the bottom one to the bottom shader, and then the top principled shader is going to go into the top shader. So now as I drag the factor around, we can mix between them. But I instead just want to use the damage as a mask. So we're going to put the color here into the factor. And so this way, now you can see that these little bits here have the damage, but then the rest of it is the cardboard surface. But there is a big problem with this, it just doesn't look very realistic. And if I zoom in closely, you can see that there isn't actually any bump, but where the damage is, that would actually bump in, and then it'd be popping out where the surface is. So we need to create like a bump value and put that into the bump so that the edges look nice and bumpy. So to do this, I'm going to click on both principled shaders, and we're going to drag them forward. Let's just drag these nodes forward here. So select these, drag them forward so we have a little bit more space here so we can add more bumps. So I'm going to select this bump, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it and drop it right here so we have another one. And then let's take the color ramp color, and I'm going to put that into the height value of the bump. So now if I zoom in here, you can see it's bumpy. But right now it looks like it's popping out instead of going back in. So let's click on the invert button, and now the damaged part looks like it's going back in. So that looks way more realistic. And then here on the distance value, I'm going to turn this to a 0.004. I think that's a pretty good distance value. You can kind of change this to control that. And then also you can drag the strength value if you want. Now what I also want to do is make the edges just a little bit lighter, and I also want to be able to control that. So what I'm going to do is drag this color ramp down and the hue saturation down from the damage mask. And then if I select both of them, I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it and drop them up here. And let's drag the noise texture back and drag the hue saturation back. And so what we're going to do is create a separate mask, but this mask is basically going to be offset a little bit, so it's slightly larger than the other one. So I want to take this hue saturation value and put it here into the color, and then let's preview this color ramp. So this way, if we change the hue saturation value, it's going to change the color ramp colors for this one and also this one here. So then for this one here, we simply just need to make it a little bit larger, and then we'll mix that into the color. So to make it a bit larger, I'm going to drag the black tab a little bit back, basically just like that, but leave the white value where it is. So just drag it back a little bit. So if I preview this one and this one, you can see they're pretty similar. So you can see they're pretty similar where they are, but the top color ramp is just a little bit bigger. So now what I want to do is add this into the base color. So I'm going to drag this mix back here because this mix is the dirt. And so I want the dirt to be on top of everything. But I'm going to now duplicate this. And we're going to stick it right here after this mix result, so just stick it right there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the damage mask color ramp, the top one, and we're going to put that into the factor. So now let's Control-Shift-Select the mix here so we can basically see what it's doing. So you can see now we're just adding that lighter color, and then here on B, we can actually make this a lighter color. And if you want to use the same hex code that I'm going to be using, then you can punch in a hex code of 89643D. And so that's going to be the slightly lighter color around the edges. So now I can Control-Shift-Select the principled shader, and it's kind of hard to see, it is pretty subtle, but if I zoom in closely here, you can see it's just slightly lighter, and if I take color B and make it even lighter, you can definitely see that better. So then what I also want to do is I want to take the damaged mask here and I want to put it into the bump so that the edges popping out where this lighter part is, the edges are also going to have a little bit of bump. So I'm going to select this bump node right here, so the one in the middle, and I'm going to duplicate it and stick it right here, so not at the very end of the setup. So just stick it right there. And we're going to take this top color ramp color, and let's put that into the height value. So now if I take this distance value and turn it up, you can see it looks very bumpy there, just around the edges. And then for this bump value, I'm going to turn it to a 0.0005. So it's pretty subtle, but you can turn it up more if you want to. And I'm also going to invert it. So when I invert it, that looks a bit better because if it's not inverted, it kind of looks like it's going back down, and that looks a bit weird because this spot is actually going back down. So I'm going to invert it, and then you could just like turn this up a little bit, or maybe turn the strength up to like a 5, or maybe even turn it up to like a 10 so you can see it better. So now you can see it look like it's starting to crack down a little bit, and then it goes even farther down where the damaged area is. But on default, I'm going to keep it very subtle. So the next thing we're going to create is the cardboard crumpled texture. So we're going to be adding it into the bump to make it look like the cardboard is kind of crumpled and bent in a few areas. So to do this, I'm going to search for a wave texture, and we're going to add the wave texture above all the other nodes. And let's Control-Shift-Select it to preview it. And then I want to use the same UV coordinates. So we're going to take the mapping vector, and we're going to drag this all the way up here and stick it into the vector of the wave texture. Now I'll change the settings, so I'm going to turn the scale to 3, and I'll turn the distortion up to 20 so it's pretty distorted, and I'll turn the detail to 5. So then what I also want to do is search for a mapping node. So let's drop the mapping node right here before the wave, and I'll drag it up here because this mapping node can affect all of the crumpled textures. Now I want to distort this wave texture by another texture because right now it's just kind of going up and down, and I want the crumbles to be in different directions. So I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop the Voronoi before the wave. And then what I'm going to do is duplicate the mapping, and we're going to drop the mapping right here. And then let's take this mapping vector and put that into the mapping of this vector. So the mapping is the same, but what I'm going to do is have this Voronoi distort the rotation. So we're going to take the color value, and we're going to put the color value into the rotation. You can see that the Voronoi is making the wave be in different rotations. So some are going this way, some are going that way, but I want it to be very smooth because you can see it looks really chunky on the edges and sharp. So I'm going to take the F1 and change it to smooth F1, and now there's going to be a smoothness in between there. And so we have this smoothness value, so you can make it bigger and smaller. And I'm going to turn the smoothness value to a 0.5, so there's just a little bit of smoothness. So now you can see we're kind of getting these little bits here, which are kind of being distorted around. And so I'm going to use that value. So we're going to use these bits here, but we're not going to use the spots in the middle because those don't look very warped, but these spots right in here kind of around where the Voronoi is, those spots are going to be used for the crumple. Now I do want to make the wave texture lighter because right now it is too dark. So I'm going to search for a map range. Let's drop the map range right here. And I'm going to change the from minute to a negative value so it's lighter. So I'll make it a negative 1.1. Negative 1.1. So it's a bit lighter. Now what I want to do is go back here to the Voronoi, and I want to duplicate it. So I'll hit Control-Shift-D to duplicate it and drop it here. And what I want to do is create a mask, which is going to basically mask out these areas. Because you can see there are these areas which are really distorted and kind of go around in a pattern. But then these chunks in the middle, I want those to be basically gone. So I'm going to preview this Voronoi texture, and we're going to create a mask for it. So I'm going to keep the scale the same so that the mask will actually work. But then what I'm going to do is turn the smooth F1 to distance to edge. So now we get all these little white spots here, and those are the same spots where we want to get rid of it because the scale value is the same. Then what I want to do is make it more contrasty, so we're going to add a color ramp after the Voronoi texture, and I'm going to drag the white tab way over so it's very small. So you can see now those little cracks are quite small. So then what I also want to do is search for a hue saturation value and put this in between the Voronoi and the color ramp. And this way I'll have a value. And so that's going to be used later in the custom node group. So now I want to mix this texture and this texture together, and we're going to use this texture to mask out those open spots. So I'm going to search for a mix color. Let's drop it here, and we're going to put the top color ramp color into the factor, and then we're going to put the map range into color A. And let's preview the mix color. So now we can take color B and we can make it fully black. So because we have this color ramp here, and because we have these light chunks here, if we're putting it into the mix here, you can see now wherever it's black, it's still going to be visible, but then wherever it's white, it's just going to be fully black. So basically, we're just masking out the texture there. So we can only see it where it's more distorted. Now, we added this hue saturation value, so you can see if I turn this up and down, that is going to change the size of the crumple. So we can make it really small or make the crumpled bits a bit bigger. So that's why I added the hue saturation value. Now what I also want to do is just make the entire thing a bit more contrasty, because you can see this is kind of just like a light gray. So what I'm going to do is search for a ramp and add a color ramp, and we're going to drop it here after the mix, and then I can drag the black tab over to make it more contrasted. And now this is really going to look good for the bump texture, because if I drag this up here and don't add any contrast, you can see that it's really black and then just really light. But that doesn't really look good, because what I want to do is have little bits where it's gone. So if I make it black here, then only the white parts are going to be popping in or out of the mesh. So that way it'll look like little crumples. Now you might be wondering why I added this map range in the first place if I was just going to make it more contrasty with the color ramp. Well, this map range is making it less contrasty before I actually put it through the color ramp and the mix. And so that's going to actually affect how the texture looks. You can see if I drag this minimum value around, it is definitely going to affect the size of those crinkles. So that's why I was using the map range. So you can play around with this if you want to make those little kind of crinkles or crumples bigger and smaller. Now I actually realized that I made the size a little bit too big, so I'm going to go back to the Voronoi and I'm going to turn the scale to 3, but then the texture's messed up. That's because I need to go to the bottom Voronoi and turn the scale to the same value of 3, and that way they're going to be the same value, so the pattern is going to be the same. So now those crumples are just a little bit bigger. So let's just box select all these nodes, and I'm going to hit F to join it into a frame. Let's give it a label, and I'm going to call this cardboard crumples, and then I'm just going to kind of drag these down and just kind of organize the nodes a little bit better. So just kind of compress them. All right, and let's just drag this down here a bit closer to the setup. So I now want to put this into normal to give it some bump. So we're going to click on this bump here, and this is in the cardboard surface. We're going to duplicate it, drop it here after this one, and I'm just going to preview the final setup. So now what I can do is I can take the color ramp from the crumples, and we're going to put the color into the height value. So now if I kind of look here, look close at the material, you can see there's some little crumples there and some little crumples over there, but there is a problem. You can see it's very, very sharp, and that doesn't look very good. So I don't want it to be quite that sharp on the edges. Well, there is this filter width value, and if I drag this around, you can see it's going to be more smooth if I turn it up. So I'm going to turn the filter width to a value of 20, and you can see now it's going to be very smooth there on that edge instead of it being really sharp. And then for the distance value, I want this to be pretty subtle, so I'm going to turn it to a 0.0006 so that it's more subtle. So you can kind of see a little bit of a crumple there, but I don't want it to be too strong. However, you could of course turn up the strength to maybe like, a 7 or a 4 or something if you want it to be stronger, but I'm going to leave it pretty subtle. Now the last thing that I want to do is add some displacement to actually make this pop out of the mesh. So we're going to have the surface pop out, and then we're going to have the back go in a little bit, but then these little lines here are going to pop out as well. So to do this, I need to search for the displacement node, drop this down here, and the displacement can go into the displacement of the material output. So now I want to mix in the lines texture, and I want to mix the lines texture with the mask because I want the mask to pop out, but then the lines to go in and out. So we need to find the mask texture, which is right up here, and then we also need to find the lines texture, and we need to mix them together. So I'm going to search for a mix color. Let's just drop it right up here, and I'm going to zoom into it. And what I want to do is take the bottom color ramp. If I preview the bottom color ramp, that's going to be that mask. So we'll put the color into the factor of this mix here, and then I'll just preview the mix. Now in color A, I'm just going to drag this up so that it is fully white. And then what I also want to do is mix in those lines, so the lines are going to be mixed in, so they'll be pushing back into the mesh. So if I Control-Shift-Select this RGB curves right here, this is in the cardboard inside, you can see we have this nice texture where it's black and then white. So I'm going to take this color and I'm going to drag it into color B. And now I can Control-Shift-Select the mix to preview it, and you can see now we basically have the white texture. And why the white texture is where the cardboard surface is because we put the mask into the factor, and then color A was fully white. So So color A is going to be the cardboard surface, and then color B, that is going to be that stripe texture. So let's take the mix and we can drag it down here next to the displacement, and we'll put the mix result into the height value of the displacement. And now we can just Control-Shift select the mix shader. So basically the white and black values of the mix are telling the displacement if it's going to pop out of the mesh or pop into the mesh. So preview the mix shader and we can preview the final thing. Now there's a few problems with this. If I kind of look here on the side of the mesh, you can see it's not actually popping out of the mesh, and then it also looks way too dark and weird. So to make it pop out of the mesh, I need to hit the N key to open up the side panel, and I want to click on the Options tab here, and then I want to open up the settings. And then I want to go here to the displacement. Instead of bump only, I want to change this to displacement and bump so that it can actually use the displacement. So then I'll hit N to close the side panel. So now you can see it's actually popping in and out of the mesh, but it's way too strong. So I'm going to take the scale value and make it a much smaller value. So I'm going to turn this to a 0.0006. I think that's a pretty good size, so I'll hit enter. And now you can see if I look here on the side, you can see the cardboard does go in and out, so it kind of goes up and down. And then right here, the cardboard surface pops out a little bit. And you can especially see here on the side, the displacement is adding a lot more detail. If you don't want the displacement, of course, you can turn it down and instead just make the bump a bit stronger, but the displacement will just add a little bit more realism. So now what I'm going to do is box select these three nodes, and I'm going to hit F to join it into a frame, and I can just call this Mix Shaders. So if we zoom out here, let's hit Control S to save, and that is the finished procedural material. But I'm now going to show you how to join it together into a custom node group so you can customize the look of the material. Now, if I zoom way over here to the texture coordinate, I want this outside the node group so that the user can choose between like the generated, UV, or object coordinates. So I'm going to hit G to grab, and then I'm going to hit F to bring it out of the frame and drop it here. So now what I'm going to do is select this texture coordinate, then go all the way over here and select the material output. So shift and select the material output so that if I zoom out here, you can see we just have these two nodes. So the first one and the last one. Now I'll hit Control I, and Control I is going to invert the selection so everything else is selected. And I'll hit Control G to join it together into a node group. So I'll hit Tab to go outside the node group, and I'll drag the node group over here. Let's also drag the material output right over here, or the texture coordinate. And then let's just make the node group bigger. I can just stick it right there. And then I'm going to copy the material name, and I can paste it here into the node group. So now I'll hit the Tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel. And I can go here to the group tab. And now what I can do is add all the custom values to the group input. So if I navigate over here to the side, we have this group input. So we're going to plug up all the custom values. So the first value that I want to add is the scale to control the size of the entire material. And the mapping is plugged up to all of these textures. So this scale value will control the size of the entire material. So I'm going to put the scale into the extra socket. Now if I click here on the scale and then go right down here to the settings, you can see it's going to be three values, so an X, Y, and Z value. But I instead want it to just be one value to control the entire size of the material at once. So I'm going to turn the vector to float, and that way it's going to be one single value. Now I need to turn the default value to 1, then I need to hit Tab to go out of the node group, and then I need to turn the scale back to 1. So now that'll change the size of the entire material. So let's hit Tab to go back into the node group. And if I double click on this value, I'm going to rename it, and I'm just going to type in cardboard scale. Then I'm going to put the group input here into this mapping, and I'll press Control H just to minimize it so it's as small as it can be. So I'm now going to hit Shift D to duplicate and hit F to bring it out of the frame. We're going to drop it here, and then I'll hit Control H to make it bigger so we have the extra slots that we can add values into. So now I can drag the group input to different values, and I can put different custom values that I want to control into the group input. So let's go here to the dirt texture, and I'm going to stick it inside the dirt texture. And I'm going to take the noise texture scale and put that into the extra socket. Let's double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to call this dirt scale. Then I'm going to take the contrast value and put that into the extra socket, and I'm going to rename it to dirt visibility. So if I hit Tab to go outside the node group, you can see the dirt visibility is making it lighter and darker because the dirt visibility is the contrast value. And then also you can change the scale of that texture. So let's go back into the node group, and I want to click on this plus here, and I'm going to add a new panel. And then I'm going to double click on the panel to rename it, and I'm going to call it dirt. And then I can drag the dirt visibility and the dirt scale inside the dirt panel. Then I want to hit Shift D to duplicate, hit F to bring it out of the frame, and then if I click on this group input, I'll press Ctrl H just to make it smaller. Let's now drag this up to the crumples, and I'm going to stick it inside the cardboard crumples. And I want to put the scale into the extra socket, and let's double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename this to crumple scale. Let's also click on the crumple scale, and we want to change the vector to float so it is one value. We'll turn the default value to 1, and then we'll go outside the node group. We'll turn this crumple scale back to 1, and then we'll go back into the node group. Also, we'll click on the plus here, we'll create a new panel, double click on the panel, and we'll rename it to crumples, and we'll put the crumple scale into the crumples panel. Let's also click on the plus here again. We're going to add a new panel. This panel we're going to rename to cardboard, and let's take the cardboard scale and put that into the cardboard. Now let's continue on adding the crumple values. So if I take the hue saturation value and change that and drag it up and down, that's going to change the thickness of the crumples. So we'll put the value into the extra socket. Let's double click on it to rename it. So we'll call it crumples thickness, and then we'll drag it here into the crumples panel. Then I want to add the crumples distortion. So if I go here to this wave texture, there's this distortion value which we originally used. Now, just to see it a little bit better, I can take this bump strength on the cardboard surface and I can make this like a 20, so it's like really strong. Now if I go back up here, you can see we have this distortion value to make it more and less distorted. So let's take the distortion, let's put it into the extra socket, and we'll double click on the distortion to rename it. And I'll call it crumples distortion and put it here into the crumples. Now if I go outside the node group, you can see we have that distortion there in the crumples, and then we also have that thickness, so you can see it's making it more and less thick. So let's hit tab to go back into the node group. And I'm going to select the group input and press Ctrl H just to make it smaller. And then let's go back here to the cardboard surface, and I'm going to turn the bump strength back to 1, so that's the default value. Then I'm going to go back here to the group input. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it, hit F to bring it out of the frame, and hit Ctrl H to make it bigger. And we're going to drag it here into the cardboard surface. And let's put in the colors. So I'm going to put color A and color B into the extra sockets. And let's rename this to cardboard color 1. And then I'll copy this, so Ctrl C, hit Ctrl V to paste it, and call it cardboard color 2. Then I want to add the edge wear color, so we can take the second mix, and we're going to take color B, put that into the extra socket, and I'm going to call this damage edge color. So now what I want to do is put the cardboard color 1 into the cardboard color 2 into the cardboard, and then for the damage, I want to click on the plus. We're going to add a new panel. This I'm going to rename to damage, and let's put the damage edge color into the damage panel. Then we'll click on the group input, we'll hit Shift D to duplicate it, and if we click on this one, we'll press Ctrl H just to make it smaller, and I'll just stick it down there. And I'm going to drag this mix over and drag the group input over here, and then we'll take this color B and put this one into the extra socket. And this one is going to be the dirt color, because you can see if I click on the mix and drag it up and down, you can see the wire is going from the dirt texture, so that's how I know it's the dirt color. So we'll put it into the extra socket, click on it to rename it, and I'll call it dirt color. And then we're going to click and drag, and let's put it in the dirt panel here. So drag it into the dirt panel, and outside the node group, you can just make sure it works. So if you take the dirt color, drag it up and down, you can clearly see there's the dirt becoming darker. So we can just go back into the node group. Let's click on the group input and we'll duplicate it. Click on this group input and hit Ctrl H to make it smaller, and just stick it down there so it's more nicely organized. Let's drag this group input over here, and we're going to drag the principled shader back and just make room for it. And let's put the roughness into the extra socket. And we're going to double click on this to rename it, and we're going to call it cardboard roughness. Now I want this single cardboard roughness value to control both materials, because we have another principled shader down here. So I'm going to select the group input, hit Ctrl H, drag it down here so it's nicely organized, and then I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, hit F to bring it out of the frame. We're going to drag it down here into the cardboard inside. So this is this texture here with the lines, and we're going to drag it down here, and then we'll put the roughness into the cardboard roughness. And because they were both the same value of 0.8, if I go outside the node group, you can see I now have this cardboard roughness, which will make both of them more rough or more shiny. So let's go back into the node group, and if I click on the cardboard roughness, let's drag it here into the cardboard panel. Then let's hit Shift D to duplicate, hit Ctrl H to make it bigger, and we're going to drag it back here. And we're going to select the hue saturation value in the mix and drag them forward so we have a little bit more space. And if I take the hue saturation value and drag it up and down, that's changing the corrugation brightness. So I'll put the value into the extra socket. Let's click on this to rename it. And I'm going to call this corrugation brightness. And then we're going to create a new panel. So we'll click on the plus, we'll add a new panel. I'm going to copy the word corrugation and just paste it here into the panel, and then we'll put the corrugation into the corrugation. So the corrugation brightness is in the corrugation. Now if I click on this mix here and make the color lighter and darker, you can see that this is going to control the dirt. And I know it's controlling the dirt because I can also click here and look all the way over here and see where the node is going to, and it's going to the dirt texture. And so what I want to do is actually put it into the dirt color that we already added so that this value will control both of them at once. So one value will control both of them. So if you look here in the group input, you can see we already have the dirt color because we didn't minimize it. So we can take color B and put that into the dirt color, and it's going to be the same exact color. So if I click on the group input, I'll hit Control H to make it smaller and just drag it down here. If I go outside the node group and you go to the dirt here, you can see this dirt color is going to change it for both of them. So it's changing the dirt color for both materials. So let's just hit Tab to go back into the node group. Let's duplicate the group input, hit Control H to make it bigger, and I now want to add color A and color B into the extra sockets. And I'm going to call this corrugation color 1, and then this one, color B, that's going to be called corrugation color 2. So now let's drag both of these into the correct panel. And I'll hit Control H to make it smaller and just drag it down there. Now let's do the bumps. So let's just drag these out so we have a bit more space, and I'll duplicate the group input, Control H to make it bigger. And we want to take this strength value and this strength is the corrugation. So we're going to take the strength, put it into the extra socket, and this one I'm going to rename to corrugation bump strength. And then let's put the corrugation bump strength into the corrugation panel. Click on the group input, Control H to make it smaller, drag it down here, and we'll duplicate it and make it bigger again. And then for this bump here, if I just click and drag and move it around, you can see the noise texture, the base noise texture is going into the bump. So I know that this strength is controlling that noise bump. So I'll put the strength into the extra socket, and I'm just gonna double click on this to rename it, and I'll call it noise bump strength. And then I can make this smaller and just drag it down here. And the noise bump strength, I'm going to put that into the cardboard panel. So now I want to add the bumps for the other material. So I'm going to duplicate this, bring it out of the frame. We're going to make it bigger. We're going to drag it right up here, and we're going to put it into the surface, and we'll drag it down here to the bumps. And let's maybe drag these back. And this node setup is getting pretty complex, as you can see, but let's just kind of drag these nodes back so we have more space in between the bumps here. So I'm going to kind of drag these apart so we have more space in between the bumps. And let's move this group input right up here. Now this first bump here, that is the corrugation bump strength, and I know that because the RGB curves is going into the bump, and if I look down here, the corrugation texture is going into the RGB curves. Now we actually already have a value for this, so if I just look here on the node group, I can even drag it out to make it bigger, we have the corrugation bump strength. So we'll take this strength value, which is 1, because if I go right down here, it's also 1 right here on this bump. So if I go all the way back up here, we can take this strength and we'll put it into the corrugation bump strength. And then I'll just make it smaller, drag it down, make it a bit smaller, I'll duplicate it and make it bigger. Now if I take the next bump here, if I just look at this, you can see that is the base noise texture. And we already have a value for that, so if I just look here for the bump strengths, you can see there it is, the noise bump strength. So I'm going to put this strength into the noise bump strength, and we'll just make it smaller, and we're going to drag it right down here, maybe put it above this bump. Alright, try to keep it as organized as you can, and we're going to duplicate this, make it bigger. And the next ones here are the damage and the damage edge. Now this one here, if I make it really strong, turn it to like a 6, you can see that's going to be the damage edge, so I'll turn it back to 1. So I'll put the strength value of 1 into the extra socket, and let's rename this to damaged edge bump strength. So damage edge bump strength, and then let's also just use this same group. So we're going to use the same input, and if we take this bump and make it stronger, like make it a 10, you can see that's going to be the very, very edge there. So I'll turn it back to 1. We'll put the strength into the extra socket. And this one, I'm going to copy the name of the damage edge bump strength and just paste the name in here. But then instead of calling it damage edge bump strength, I'm just going to call it damage bump strength. So let's just make this smaller, we'll minimize it and just like stick it right down there. And then the last one that I want to add is the crumples. So I'll duplicate this, make it bigger. And you can see this one right here. If I turn the strength up to a really big value like 10 or something, you can see it's controlling the crumples. So I'll turn it back to 1. Let's put the strength into the extra socket, and I'll just click on this to rename it. And I'll just call this crumples bump strength. So now what I want to do is put the crumples bump strength into the crumples panel, and the damaged, we're going to put that into the damage panel, and also this one here, put that into the damage panel. And let's make this smaller and just drag it right down here. Then I also want to go way back here and go over to this base noise texture, and I want to duplicate one of these group inputs, bring it out of the frame, Control H to make it bigger, drop it here into the base noise texture, and we want to put the scale into the extra socket. And let's double click on this to rename it, and we're just going to call it Cardboard Noise Scale. And this one, we're going to drop it into the cardboard panel. And we'll just make it smaller and just stick it right down there. Then I also want to duplicate it, bring it out of the frame, we'll stick it here into the corrugation texture and we'll make it bigger. And let's take the scale, put that into the extra socket and also the distortion. And then we also want to take this rotation value because this rotation is actually going to rotate that wave texture, so the direction of the corrugation. So I'll put the rotation into the extra socket. And then I'm just going to copy the name corrugation. So hit Control C to copy the name, and I'll go to the rotation and just paste that. So it says corrugation rotation. We'll put it into the corrugation, and then we'll do the corrugation scale and the corrugation distortion. And we'll put both of these into the corrugation. And we'll just make this smaller and just stick it down there. So now let's go over to the damage mask, and I want to just find one of these group inputs. We'll duplicate it, bring it out of the frame, stick it into this frame, and we'll make it bigger. And you can see this value right here, this is going into the color ramp, and so this color ramp is going into the bump strength. And so this is actually controlling kind of that edge bit. And so if I turn up the value up and down, it's also changing the color as well as the strength because it's going into the bump. So let's take the value and put this into the extra socket, and we'll double click on this to rename it. And I'm going to call this damage edge amount. And we'll drop it into the damage group. Then I just want to control the overall amount. So this value, the hue saturation value before the other one, this one is going to control both of them because it's before the hue saturation value. So this one is probably like the most master control, probably the most important control that you'll want to use because this is controlling the overall damage. So I'll put the value into the extra socket and I'll call this damage amount. And I'll drop this one into the damage as well. And we'll make it smaller and we'll just drag it right down here before the noise. And then I'll duplicate it, bring it out of the frame, and we're going to drag it all the way over, and I'm pretty sure this is the last one. We're going to put this into the mix shader, make it bigger, and I want to control the displacement. So we can take the displacement scale, put that into the extra socket, and then we'll just rename this. And I'm just going to call this displacement strength. And the displacement, I'm going to put this into the cardboard one. So drop it here into the cardboard one. If you can't even see all these because it's too big, you can just make some of them smaller and stick it into the cardboard one. And we'll just make this smaller, and I'm going to drag it right down here, and I'm going to put it underneath the mix color. So before I finish this up, I actually want to reorganize all of these so it makes more sense. So I've already put them into the right panels. What I can actually do is just hold down the control key and then middle click and drag to make this nice and large so it's easy to see. So you can of course organize this however you want, but what I'm first going to do is drag them all down so that they're smaller. And then I'm going to drag the cardboard and put it here at the very top. So the cardboard is first. Then I want the damage to be next, so I'll drag the damage right here after the cardboard. Then after that, the corrugation. Then after that, I'm going to have the dirt. And then after that, the crumples. So cardboard, damage, corrugation, dirt, and crumples. Let's open up the cardboard one first. And I want the scale to be at the very top, so I'll drag this up here because that makes sense. Then the noise scale should be next, so let's put the noise scale after the scale. Then I want to add the colors, so I'll put color 2 and then put color 1 before color 2. So you have the scale, noise scale, color 1, and color 2, and of course you can organize this however you want. Then I'm going to put the roughness after the colors, that makes kind of sense for a shader, and then the noise bump strength, and then the displacement strength. Now the displacement strength is mainly affecting the corrugation, so I'm going to click on the displacement strength and put it here into the corrugation. So let's close the cardboard and we're going to open up the damage. So first what I want to do is put the edge color at the very top. Then I want to take the edge amount and put it next. And then just the damage amount after the edge amount. Then I want to do the damage edge bump strength at the very bottom. So we have the damage edge color, then the edge amount, then the bump strength, and then the edge bump strength. So I'll close the damage and we'll open up the corrugation. And for the corrugation, it makes sense to have the scale first. So I'll put the scale at the very top and the displacement we'll put at the very bottom. Then I want to have the distortion after the scale, but then I want to put color 1 and color 2 after the distortion. Then let's put the brightness right after the colors. That makes sense because you'd want to change the brightness and that would affect the colors. Then we can just have the rotation next, then the bump strength next, and then the displacement next. So we'll close the panel and we're going to open up the dirt. And for the dirt, I want to have the dirt scale first. Then I want to have the visibility next and then the color last. We'll close this one and we'll open up the crumples. So for the crumples, I want to have the scale first, then I want to have the thickness next, then I want to have the distortion after that, and then finally the bump strength. Now, as I was editing the tutorial, I realized there were a couple of extra values that I wanted to add with the damage mask. So if you go into the damage mask, I'm going to click on the group input, hit Ctrl H to make it bigger, and I'll move it up here. And I also want to add the values from the noise texture because this noise texture is going to control how the damage looks. So I'm going to put the scale, the detail, the roughness, and the distortion here into the group input. I'll press Ctrl H to make this smaller and just bring it down. Then if I hit the N key to open up the side panel, I just want to rename these to damage. So damage scale, this one is going to be damage detail 1. Then the roughness, I'm going to rename to damage detail 2. And then this last one, I'll rename to damage distortion. And then I'm going to drag and drop each one of these into the damage panel. Alright, so now I'm just going to click on these arrows to open them all up. I will Control middle click and drag to make this a better size. Let's just drag this really small, and then I can zoom out. And if you want to reorganize any of these and move them around, you can. I'm just going to hit Tab to go outside the node group and hit the N key to close the side panel. And then I'll just click and drag just to make these smaller. So if you click and drag on these little arrows here, that's going to compress them, so make them smaller. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you were able to follow along, even though it was a pretty complex setup. And if you'd like to purchase the procedural material to get the finished Blender file with the material and the node group with all the custom settings, I'll have a link in the video description to the project files, and purchasing is a great way to help support the channel. You can also check out my ultimate Blender procedural material pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.